If you tell me which future, I will predict it for you. When people ask me, and believe me, they keep asking me from events to pharma companies, news writers and reporters, what is the future of this or that? And I always tell them, I will tell you what the future is of this or that medical specialty or therapeutic area, but first tell me which future shall I describe? The future in which we knew what was the desired future and we tried to move towards it a bit faster, or the one where we didn't have any idea about at least what kind of future we would love to see for that medical specialty. So we have a direct impact on which future might unfold. We can choose a desired future. We can backcast towards today. Well, if that's the future we choose, then what kind of steps shall we start making from today? Legal steps, technological, social, cultural steps to have a higher chance to reach that desired future.
Welcome to the Digital Pulse, a podcast from MPJ Digital Medicine, where we explore the ideas, innovations, and people shaping the future of healthcare. I'm Dr. Benjamin Mazer, a medical journalist and practicing pathologist at Johns Hopkins University. In this episode, Journal Editor-in-Chief Dr. Joseph Kovedar and I talk with Dr. Bertalan Meskó, a Hungarian physician better known as the Medical Futurist. We learn about the cutting-edge ways doctors and scientists can use artificial intelligence to communicate more effectively. We hope you'll enjoy this conversation. And if you do, please don't forget to rate us 5 stars and subscribe. Thanks. Why don't we start? Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the field of explaining and predicting medical technology to the public. It's definitely not a traditional career path.
Definitely not. Absolutely. I think it started when I was a little kid and I fell in love with all kinds of gadgets and technologies. And I think from the age of 6 or 7, I've been building my own personal computer. So I love living with technologies and looking at all the announcements and news about that. But when I finished my PhD and I sort of reached my childhood dream of becoming a scientist, I felt that that part was missing from my life. So I could devote my life the next few decades to doing research in a very specific field under genomics. But then how about all the rest, about all these technologies, the rise of artificial intelligence, digital health? So I felt that something was missing, and I don't like to find comfort in something I don't like enough. So I thought I should try to merge or combine two fields. One is definitely the evolution of technologies and social, cultural changes in healthcare. And the second was future studies. And that time, I'm talking about almost 15 years ago, I didn't see many physicians or clinician scientists dealing with future studies or using futures methods. So it felt like it's a niche area to combine these two fields. Now, very briefly, medicine, healthcare, and future studies. So I started building this brand called the Medical Futurist through two ways. One was more about scientific communication. I wanted to discuss and describe to the general public, not just patients, but even individual physicians, policymakers, maybe government officials even around the world, where we are heading, what these technological changes mean, what kind of transformation healthcare is going through, but in a way that everyone can digest and understand. And that's why I've launched a whole range of channels under the name The Medical Futurist. I have a team of about 10 people helping me do that day by day. Social media channels, YouTube channels, website, articles, analysis, books, and all these. But I'm still a scientist, and I like to call myself a scientist as my primary profession. So I do the same, but not through science communication, but by publishing peer-reviewed papers and studies, mostly about the rise of digital health, rise of artificial intelligence, now more and more about generative AI, but quite recently also about how anyone else, not just clinicians and scientists and physicians could use futures methods, but everyone else in every single branch of science could reach out to the same methods to simply make better assumptions, or as you said, make better predictions about the future.
Yeah. One of the passions I've had since I took this role as editor-in-chief has been communicating most of our papers are very complex scientifically to the general public. And we do things like what I call plain old English editorials, and we have news and views. There's a few outlets to try to help move that so that an executive that maybe doesn't have the deep knowledge of what machine learning is can actually understand why a paper's important. And the reason I set that background is because you've done an amazing job. I've followed you for decades now, and always enjoyed how you can take a complex topic and communicate it in a clear way for, as we just said, for non-clinicians or non-scientists. Maybe just give us a few secrets. How do you manage to do that?
Well, hearing that compliment from you is simply amazing. Thank you so much for saying that. I think what I can confirm is that for more than 1.5 decades, I've been trying, and I'm not trying to be modest here. Literally, the way people digest media channels or information or news, and now with AI flop and all these large language models out there, it's a constant way of experimentation. I mean, the goal I have now is the same I had 15 years ago, is that I like to feel useful by doing research, by publishing scientific papers. But then, as I mentioned, I want to be able to help everyone else digest enough about the results that we publish, because I think that's a role of scientists must have, that we have to help the public understand what we are working on, how we are thinking about the future, what we can deliver or contribute to the table. I don't think I can describe or explain all the studies that we have for the general public very well, or very in an articulate way, but we can share maybe enough to help them understand where we are heading, or what this particular result from a study means in context about healthcare's big transformation. But what I can share from my secrets is that I've been experimenting with, I think, over 30 or 40 tools and media channels over the last 1.5 decades. And I don't even feel like any of them is working well enough today. So to give you an example, on my YouTube channel, first more than 10 years ago when I launched it, I thought that I would try to describe like basic concepts like digital words, or what digital health means was the simplest definition, or what machine learning means in an AI in healthcare context for the general public in a few minutes. Then there was a period, maybe during COVID and maybe between 2020 and 2022, but it seemed that all the YouTube users who watched such, a bit more deep, a bit more serious content wanted to watch longer videos. So we started producing so-called episodes in which in 10, 15, 20 minutes, even just like a presentation or a speech, I try to cover a topic in real, at depth and in detail. And then it stopped working. So from 2023, we had to go back to the short forms, but it seemed that YouTube Shorts are booming out and everyone wants to just watch as short videos about even deep topics as possible. So we started producing a lot of YouTube Shorts. But now people are going back to the 2, 3, 4 minutes long videos. So all I can say is that, and it's just one channel as an example, that every single week with my dedicated team, we are trying to experiment. And I think, I don't want to be like, very romantic here, but I think 9 out of 10 times we will fail. But maybe once a topic, a video, an article, analysis will break the barriers of mainstream. And like literally out of the blue, about 2 months ago on X, I shared something. I share like 50, 40 news analysis, context, and so on every week. So it's quite usual that we share stuff. I shared something that got 5, 6 million impressions and views and reactions. That's quite out of the blue. It's like it can be comparable to a CNN or a major media channel, but we have no idea what we did in the right way for that particular post or that particular analysis. So the only thing we can keep doing that is we will keep on experimenting. And now as a good futurist, I even envision that in a few years, we will have to fight against AI flop, or some parts of my videos will be AI made, but it will be like a healthy balance, healthy combination of my human touch, my human context, and my intuition as a futurist, as a physician, but also a lot of really amazing high quality content coming from AI. So we will keep on experimenting with all these, but I think the purpose is what matters the most here, that I have no agenda. So I don't want to sell people anything, maybe in my books, of course, but there are no advertisements, for example, on my website, or I don't endorse any kind of products. I'm not in the advisory boards of any startups or companies, because then, how can be objective as a researcher? So the purpose is clear. I would like to feel useful for the community of digital health, medicine, and healthcare worldwide. So then if something amazing comes out, like an announcement about a new technology, a breakthrough in science, or a company announcement, a press release, a study, something comes out, I would like more and more people to think that if they don't understand what's going on, that there is a place where they can go to, where they will hear the context. They will get answers for their questions without a, big agenda rising above those messages. That's what I stand by today. And that's the plan for the next 5-10 years too. Just keep on experimenting with all these media formats and channels.
Yeah, I think you hit on a good point that about the challenges and the complexities of doing this. You've sort of made it your job in part, and you have a team. And as someone else who's sort of involved in the media, a lot of thing, but also academics, a lot of people come up to me and they're like, of course I want to get, news about my papers out. I want to share my research and, have an audience, but like they can't do this as like a full-time job like you do, or, I spend a lot of time doing this. They have a very limited amount of time, and they're not experts at managing the media side of things, which is a real skill. You say you trial and error, but what you're doing is building obviously a very valuable skill and a hard skill to learn. And so, I think that's sort of where academics feel this barrier is like, this is not my full-time job. I can't learn this stuff from scratch. I can't have a team of a dozen people, helping me. So like, what is the absolute simplest, most effective way? I have a new paper out. I have a new finding. I obviously want to get an audience for it or share it with the right people. I mean, what can they do that's doesn't require that much of a time effort? I'm curious what you think.
The reason why I was smiling while you were asking the question is that 3 years ago, I would have said something really different, like focus on your communication skills and try to talk to your audience like you describe your study to your parents. Literally, actually, media experts told me that kind of trick, that if I can explain my study to my parents who are not academics, then I'm on the right track. But now my answer is pretty different. Work with a large language model. Simply learn bring prompt engineering or the skill of context engineering to the highest possible level in your academic life, because then you will be able to ask the right questions to those large language models, which are simply amazing at working with text. So I'm not talking about, building a hypothesis in a research program with a large language model, because it's just about communication. And in communication, these tools are impeccable. We use them every day. I use them every day. Otherwise, I would lose so much time. Plus, I cannot be, I cannot fine tune my text and my messages as efficiently. And I think that efficient is the right word, as efficiently as possible to reach the audiences I have in mind with the goals that I laid in front of me without the help coming from large language models. And it's not like, well, here is my study and translate it to the general public. I'm not talking about these kinds of prompts. I'm talking about, because you asked about a skill that we can learn at least as fast as possible, is to learn to work with these tools. And sometimes I don't even know, and I'm quite good at prompt engineering, how to address a challenge I'm going through. And then I don't write a bad prompt, but then I ask questions to the large language model so they can ask me back those questions. I can answer them. And then even the tool will help me how to find the right prompt for them so they can start working on the issue I couldn't solve by myself. That's largely based on text. So briefly, I would say prompt and context engineering are the right skills now. If anyone wants to be good at, science communication, that's the right tool to use, because it will solve so many of your problems. It will save you so much time, of course, if you learn how to use it in a balanced way.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of dig into that a tiny bit. So, when you talk about this, are you talking about having like a conversation with it, like, or, you sort of ask it to, give you the best way to explain, this particular point in your study or whatever, I mean, how are you
Absolutely
interacting with this, like, more specifically? I think a lot of people
I
would
give
be
you a real life
surprised to hear
example.
this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I have a study coming out, and I really want to share the results with my general public and my followers. But I understand that some of the study elements were so deep that I won't be able to describe everything. But I don't want to tell the large language model which segment or line to focus on. So I start with a prompt like this. Ask me 5 or 10 questions about this new study we just came up with, because my goal here is to share snippets of it or the results, the context that the general public, mostly in my case, physicians, patients, policymakers, government officials, researchers, and and medical innovators and business leaders will understand. But first, ask me those 5 to 10 questions. And then after I answer those questions, help me write the prompt for you, dear large language model, that at the end will simply yield a short post I can share across channels. And if I hope that answered your question, because I think that's how in practice I do it week by week, but I would like to go a bit further than that. Because this has been the case with large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. They're amazing at solving these tasks. But the next step is really imminent. The next step is I've seen tools in the last couple of weeks, these not just AI agents, but not databases, platforms for a range of AI agents. But I do the same, but I do it like building a factory. And what I mean by this in practice is that if I wanted to, and I haven't done it before because so far, because I'm confident that I can do my job as a medical futurist without these tools, having a team and all that and the experience. But imagine a platform where I can create, it's like, it looks like imagine a table. And I create rules and algorithms like, here are the top 3 large language models. I will keep on giving you news, which I find personally interesting every single day. I will choose 2 or 3 news, press releases, announcement every day. I will feed these links, 3 links for you every day. You will use each of these big large language models. You will create the prompts for me through which these can produce the right post for me. A different post, a different message and tone for every single major social media channel we have. Then use 5 AI image creators to create, images we could use by sharing those posts, because that's what people click the most on when the news announcement has a good image, a good visual, and even start creating a prompt for a different large language model about writing a YouTube script. So then I can go to my studio and simply use a teleprompter to record it. And all this is automated. It's like a platform of AI agents. And I'm just feeding the links. And at the end, I get the stories and the texts. I don't think about them anymore. I don't write them anymore, which is frightening in the first place. But that's the kind of power that lies in these platforms of AI agents. So I started experimenting with them. I don't see their value yet, but that's the promise that these AI agents will be able to bring to the table, on top of all the things that large language models have been doing for us.
To clarify that, that's such an inspiring story. You have created that, or you're in the process? Just give us a little more. Maybe you said this, but I didn't get whether it was real or next step.
It's real. I'm just a
You've
general
done it.
user. It's
You've done
like
it. Okay.
it's like using ChatGPT. You go there, you register, you pay the premium
Sure.
price, or you
But
use
to
the free
create the
one. But there's a
agents,
platform. There are platforms existing right there.
yeah. Did you use a specific one to create that workflow that you talked about?
I haven't made a choice about which one to use, but
Got it.
AI agents and these platforms will, the
Right.
internet will
No,
be
I know
full of
they're
them
out there.
in
Yeah.
a few months. But I can tell you one that I would like to choose from now on. I will keep on discovering them until I can, start preferring one of them.
I'll keep in touch because I have ambitions to do similar things, but I don't right now want to really start
Mhm.
paying a subscription to one because they keep changing so rapidly. Anyway, we'll put that aside. Um, so I can't resist quoting a famous American baseball player, Yogi Berra, as a tee up to my next question, who said, "It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future." And so, all kidding aside, this is something that really you have mastered, I would say. And I've, over the years, at my 3.5 decades of doing this kind of work, have been asked to predict the future any number of times. And I felt like you could do something I could be relatively confident, say, in the next 5 years, although most of the time I was overly optimistic about change. And you could say almost anything about 20 years out because who's going to question, right? You're just talking about what you think might happen. How do you balance that, those two things? So again, I think most of us who are in a given industry can look and say, well, we think in the next few years, X and Y are going to happen. Uh, there are people out there who are quite Maybe they're your competition. I don't know, but they're really brash about saying what's going to happen in 20 or 30 years, and I usually discount them. So how do you go about, I know this is it's a weird question in a way, but how do you go about sorting out how to predict and how to and have you ever, second part of the question, have you ever gone back and checked your predictions? I wrote a book in 2015 called The Internet of Healthy Things. And over the last year or so, I've been looking back at each chapter to see how well we did. So that's kind of fun to do that. So two-part question, how do you do it? And then do you go back and check and see how successful you were?
This is the biggest controversy of my own scientific career, is that my job is literally, or has been literally for almost 15 years, to sort of predict the future and put useful predictions on the table that will turn out to be right. And I think my track record, without sounding too self-confident, is quite okay. But the controversy here is that for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been fighting against that idea very proactively and very dynamically. That making predictions makes absolutely no sense. Because what's the point? Making one prediction means that we imply that there's one future, there's one singular timeline, and as I'm the professional and you are not, then I will have a better idea about what's going to happen on that singular timeline. But it makes absolutely no sense, because in fact, multiple futures exist. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been publishing papers, one perspective piece for your invitation in MPJ Digital Medicine too, about the importance of simply just acknowledging the fact that there are multiple futures ahead. So when people ask me, and believe me, they keep asking me, from events to pharma companies, from news writers and reporters to other media channels, what is the future of this or that? And I always tell them, I will tell you what the future is of this or that medical specialty or therapeutic area, but first tell me, which future shall I describe? The future in which we knew what was the desired future and we tried to move towards it a bit faster, or the one where we didn't have any idea about at least what kind of future we would love to see for that medical specialty. So a bit jokingly, if you tell me which future, I will predict it for you. So I have a lot of time, attention, and academic work put into not fighting against the idea of predictions, but to help everyone understand that not just there are multiple futures ahead, but it means that we have a direct impact on which future might unfold. Even more than that, we can choose a desired future, we can backcast towards today. Well, if that's the future we choose, then what kind of steps shall we start making from today? Legal steps, technological, social, cultural steps, to have a higher chance to reach that desired future. So while I do make predictions, because that's what people call them, every single time I make those predictions, I also write down as a disclaimer that these are not predictions, but my job is to highlight trends and changes, because maybe that's the unique, characteristics of my job, that I don't work as a physician and then I try to focus on the future, but my job is literally focusing on the future. I would say 6, 8, my wife would say 10, 12 hours a day. It's subjective, and then come up with things that will be useful for the community, because I will, from my, zoomed out bird's eye perspective, I will be able to find out directions or changes or trends that maybe put a policymaker into a better position, or a government official, or a physician or patient. I'm sorry for the long answer, but it's quite an important topic close to my heart. And a relevant example is coming from MPJ Digital Medicine, that with Professor Topol, when ChatGPT came out 1.5 years later, we published a paper about how to regulate generative AI, but more specifically large language models. And in that paper, we started discussing that, okay, the model now can deal with text, with hallucinations and all the ups and downsides, but the next versions will deal with image, sound, video, full text. So the question is, how can we help regulators today to get ready for those new iterations when they get rolled out to the market to billions? That's unprecedented, to billions of patients and physicians. So then when those become technologically accessible, regulators will be ready too, and they will not lag behind all these technological announcements. I think that's where pinpointing or highlighting trends and directions can help people and stakeholders of healthcare to make better decisions today. And at the end of the day, I think that's the purpose of using future studies and futures methods, to be useful today in decision making. Because, and just one last thing, if I start making predictions for you, I will make 10 predictions and 9 out of them actually will turn out to be right. I'm quite a good futurist, but 1 will be wrong. Then what about my 11th prediction? Will you trust me that that one will work or not? That's why making predictions does not contribute to decision making today, but highlighting trends, pinpointing visions, or working on scenarios, or doing vision writing exercises and creating futures wheels that are very approachable futures methods, it becomes more like a routine way of approaching the future, whether you're a scientist or a policymaker or a patient leader. And from that point, talking about the future will not be something like for science fiction geeks and nerds like myself, but all of us will have a sort of new language talking about the future because we just start using futures methods on a routine basis.
What I'm hearing is you seem kind of skeptical of the more quantitative or formalized forecasting, I think is sort of the right terminology, that has sort of gained popularity in recent years as a way to, make predictions in a probabilistic way and try to be held accountable for those predictions, or at least, as Joe alluded to, kind of retrospectively evaluate how accurate they were. I don't know how much it's hit you over there, but in the US, a sort of big area of this is elections and predicting elections. And we have Nate Silver, who ran a big election forecasting website and production, and right, he gives probabilistic predictions about how elections will turn out, and of course sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, and if you measure it quantitatively, he's pretty good, right? I mean, these things can be measured using polls and all that sort of thing. And so he has a pretty good track record. But of course, if you say there's a 90% chance someone's going to win an election, 10% of the time someone else, the other person wins the election. So sometimes you're wrong. And of course, he gets criticized for this, or this whole method gets criticized because it's easy to point to those times when it was wrong. So it sounds like maybe you're trying to avoid that having the public understand predictions in that way, or that kind of criticism or skepticism. I don't know if that rings true to you.
Now, forecasting is one of the methods I've been describing. There are others that are less quantifiable, futures wheel, scenario analysis, but forecasting, and with your question, you have been poking the bear. Forecasting is one of my favorite exercises. Literally, I always say that in everyone's profession, there is something they are the proudest of and nobody cares. And for me, that's the fact that I'm a super forecaster. There is the website called the Good Judgment Project, where people can make forecasts about election results, technological progress, social, MBA results, baseball, anything you can imagine. There are very well-designed questions in the database, thousands of them. And I've been quite active for, I think, more than a decade. And your results are quantifiable. There's a score called the Breyer score that can be assigned to your result, because those forecasts become, confirmed or not when they become real, like an election is done, or we have an NBA champion, or the baseball season is over, and you get a score assigned to you as a forecaster. And below a certain threshold, when you become really good at that, you become a part of a super forecaster group, which I'm very proud of to be part of that group. The point I was trying to make is that before, and I'm talking about not 10, but 3 years ago, the top 10 forecasting groups in the world included human groups. I have to say human communities of people, sometimes, CIA agents, sometimes forecasters at the Good Judgment Project, or super forecasters like ourselves. But the top 10 list from this year included super forecasters, us being the top one, based on simply quantifiable performance. The second one was the Good Judgment Project's general community. And in the next 8 spots, you find AI models. So we are living in forecasting. We are living through an artificial intelligence-based revolution, literally. And I have no doubts that in a few years, AI forecasters will either get extremely close to us or will beat us in this. But the difference, or I'm not trying to defend the reason why we have to keep on having human forecasters when the AI becomes better at that, but it's one thing to be, accurate performance-wise based on your score. And it's a different thing to provide your rationales, why you forecast the outcome of a question this or that way. Because while you're a government official and you want to see literally, how many FDA cleared AI-based technologies will be in the FDA database before the end of 2027. Now there are 1,400. Because they want to see if it's more than 2,000, there is a big boom in the industry and all the regulations must change. If maybe a few dozens are being added in 1 year, it's also a big trend that something is missing. Evidence-based medicine cannot be applied. So every single quantifiable change is a message for regulators out there. Maybe you ask a question like that. I will provide a rationale with my human intuition, with my judgment, with my creativity, why I see the outcome of that question this or that way. And as new information comes in, of course, I will keep updating my forecasts, but every single time I will provide my rationales. We found that, so the super forecaster group, that AI is really getting amazing at performing better and better regarding accuracy at the forecasting the outcome, but it's not really useful when providing the rationales. And human decision makers always look for the rationales first to understand why this or that probability is being highlighted, not just the actual result. Because as you mentioned, even if we are quite good at what we are doing as forecasters, we cannot be sure and we still make mistakes. That's why we always do a post-mortem analysis, understanding what kind of bias we had in our thinking or reasoning or the system that led to making a wrong prediction. As you mentioned, we don't really do often 90-10. It's usually like 54 and 46-ish. That's the kind of difference we're looking for here. But the rationals, I think that represents the real difference between AI forecasting those outcomes and humans doing the same.
I mean, it sounds like a real sort of full circle moment, as a journalist, it's a similar thing, right? We're trying to analyze current events and provide a larger perspective on it, maybe a little bit of prediction about the near future. It's contextualizing, right? A series of events. And there's a lot of criticism of journalism too, that you're just sort of, it's opinion, you're making things up, you're biased. The field of data journalism has grown over the last 10 or 15 years in sort of the same way they've tried to create a more quantitative forecasting science. And the idea is, right, you use data, you lay out your methods more carefully, and you do something, more scientific and more quantitative and verifiable rather than just kind of, vague opinion giving. And it sounds like what you're saying is, that AI has gotten so good at that the value add now is that human sort of qualitative opinion giving. And so we've gone back to what was being criticized just a few years ago as being something that's valuable again. Is that what you're suggesting?
The reason why I was smiling was that you just exposed the whole, academia about scientific publishing. And I don't want to drop like a cognitive grenade into the conversation, but just think about it for a second. What you mentioned literally word by word, like you share your opinion as a reporter in your article, which should matter, but then you get the criticism that it's just subjective. Think about any single study peer-reviewed paper out there. Usually they have a section about, future directions or how the research should progress from now on. If you think about that, every single one of those sections are subjective opinions, maybe even, mere assumptions of the scientist and the authors of the paper. And I don't want to harm or hurt anyone in the community. I do the same as a scientist myself. But what if instead of sharing just our, assumptions and subjective opinions about the future, all of the scientists writing those papers could use some basic futures methods, a scenario analysis, a futures wheel, a vision writing, simple forecasting methods to still write about future directions, but in a more systematically validated and verified way. So, and just imagine you as a reporter doing the same. Because you can do two things. You can say at the end of your article, then maybe the future of this or that could be laid out, with these details. Or I used scenario analysis with two of the experts in the field, and the future of this field could be something like this or that. Same details, but the quality is fundamentally different. One is entirely subjective, and the other included using basic futures methods. So that's what I've been trying to, with my colleagues, fight for in the last couple of years, to make everyone acknowledge that you don't have to become a futurist to have a sort of language about the future. As when you read about the past, you don't have to become a historian, yet you can have an opinion about the past, and you can even learn about stories from there, and you can look at artifacts and all the books about the history, about the past. We can do the same about the future. It's just that we have zero experience doing that. You study history in primary school, but you don't study the future. You study, you learn methods as a general human being about learning legends and stories and sagas about all these. We learn how to provide the context about the past, but we cannot do the same about the future. So my question is always just something simple. What if we could use these basic futures methods to build a language around the future? So it's not just I'm sharing my assumptions about what might happen next, but I use these systematically validated methods with my colleagues and experts around the world to come up with these potential trends, to highlight directions that might be relevant for the future.
Wow.
This is great.
You've been listening to The Digital Pulse from NPJ Digital Medicine, a new podcast where we explore the ideas, innovations, and people shaping the future of healthcare. I'm Dr. Benjamin Mazer. Thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast app. New episodes will also be broadcast live on the Cassini platform. And check us out on X at NPJ Digital Med. I hope you'll join us next time.